half of Gen Z men say they are no longer actively even trying to date. They're not even trying. We have never had a generation of young people doing as poorly, relatively speaking, as we do now. Young men are just failing, and there's a lack of empathy for them.
Scott is one of those people who pushes you to see the world differently.
Because the way to make a lot of money is to start making a little. We now live in an attention-based economy. The reality is women want economic security and they want someone who's going to protect their children.
If I want to have a chance with a lot of the women who I actually want to be with, there's no other way around it. I need to make more money.
They look at a guy and it says, when they look at you, they say, this guy has discipline. This guy can commit to something. This guy is good. I would say the biggest threat to our society isn't carbon emissions or climate change, or I would say that it's...
Scott Galloway, thank you very much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Whereabouts are you based?
I am in cloudy, the sun. There's a strange round yellow thing peeking through. I think it's called the sun. I'm in London.
Oh, you're in London?
Yeah.
I spent 3 years there before I came here. I do.
Oh, nice.
I'm fond of it, and then at the same time, I'm not so fond of it.
Where are you now, Mike?
I'm in Dubai, so I've been here for this has been the base for 4.5 years now.
And are you happy there?
I am at this point in time. I'm currently single, no kids, got a nice apartment, and pretty much I'm enjoying my life now. I'm 33. Everything's good.
It seems like I still haven't wrapped my head around Dubai. I've probably been there half a dozen times, mostly for business, but it initially kind of struck me as Vegas minus the charm. It just felt like a giant mall that was overfunded. And the more I go back, the more I sort of appreciate, well, really nice new things is actually pretty nice.
Yeah.
And it's safe and good quality of life. It's just amazing how many talented young people such as yourself are just gravitating towards the Gulf. And, it's mostly resources. It's mostly, that's where the action is. That's where the jobs are. That's where the money is. But every time I go, I think that I enjoy Dubai more, and I've been going to Riyadh, which I really enjoy.
From my experience, I've found it's been incredibly good for networking and finding like-minded people who are just driven, ambitious, and want to be in a place where they can really fulfill their potential and just progress with their career. And I noticed that when I lived in the UK, particularly in London, I struggled there quite a bit, more so than here, to find more people like me.
Well, that old adage, go west, young man, that used to be San Francisco. I think Dubai is go Gulf, young woman or man. It's for people who are ambitious and are willing to take a risk and move and want to get kind of skate to where the puck is headed, if you will, that aren't necessarily in tech, is the way I would describe it. And that is, if you come out of school in the U.S. and you're super ambitious and want to be in tech, you just still head to San Francisco. As much shitposting as there is about California, 90% of AI is within a 7-mile radius of SFO International Airport. I find in Asia and Europe, young, ambitious people such as yourself that want to get in front of a big wave head to Dubai. There's just so much opportunity there. It's being subsidized by the government. They're just throwing a lot of capital at emerging industries, so there's just more opportunity. And it's kind of optimized for not only people your age, people your age who are single and families. So Dubai is a modern marvel, right? It helps to have hundreds of billions of dollars in petrochemical funding, but essentially they have built this unbelievable, urban metropolis from the desert. What you said about London, I find is true, and that is the majority of London wealth is built off of other people's wealth made elsewhere. I have actually met very few people out of hospitality and real estate that have built true organic wealth here in London. It's sort of what has been described as a butler economy, and that is it's serving other people's wealth where they've either built it, stolen it, co-opted it, whatever it is, manage it. But as strong as the universities are, as strong as the culture is, 7 in 10 IPOs in the last 10 years in the UK are below their offering price. Apple is worth more than the entire FTSE. So the 100 biggest companies in the UK aren't worth as much as Apple. And I find in general, my very reductive analysis people always say compare the US to Europe, and I can't say Europe because, Spain is obviously a lot different than Greece and different than Scotland, but my general reductive analysis is that the U.S. is still the best place to make money, and Europe is the best place to spend it. And I think that's also now true of the Gulf. The Gulf is the best place for non-tech or people who are having trouble getting into the U.S. because for some reason we've decided we're no longer a nation of immigrants. It's the best place to make money. But I think I would be surprised, or I wouldn't be surprised if by the time you're in your 40s and collecting dogs and kids and maybe have some money that you might decide to move back to Europe or a Western country, because I still think the quality of life is exceptional.
Yeah, at the moment, I see myself going to Spain. I like the climate there. I like the way of life is certainly more relaxed. They like to have their afternoon siestas. Everything's closed on a Sunday. It's for me right now, it's not the place, but certainly when I'm older, I really don't know if this is the place where I would want to raise a family. It's certainly safe, but I don't think it just seems like such an unrealistic place. Like it's a bubble. And I don't know what effect that would have on kids being brought up here. They're not exposed to the real world reality, I don't think.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because if you have money, your kids are going to be in a bubble wherever they are. And, I generally find that, the key is that, there's a whole other talk show, parenting, and you have some time here. But what the studies show is more important than the country, more important even than the parents, is their peer group. So the best thing you can do for your kids is try and find or manicure a context where they have really solid peers. And obviously schools are important, but these are good problems. You're obviously off to the races. You're in your early 30s and hosting a successful podcast from Dubai, which means you're mobile, means you're smart, you're embracing the information economy. And, this goes to a little advice that I give, or a piece of advice I give to people in their 20s and 30s. Get to one of the super cities. Especially before you start to collect dogs and kids, because your frame for where you decide to live will change once you have dogs and kids. But the amount of opportunity that you're going to bump off of in Dubai or in London or a Madrid or New York, 2/3 of the economic growth over the next 30 years are going to come from 20 super cities. So you'd rather be good in Dubai than great in Puglia. You're surfing in front of the biggest waves. It's like I used to surf when I was younger, and I learned to surf in Hawaii where there's an offshore breeze and perfect waves, and I thought, wow, I am really good at this. And then I made the mistake of trying to surf in California where the waves weren't nearly as benign, and I realized this shit's hard. And what you want to do is you want to get to an environment where the waves are perfect, where you can be really good much more easily. And that's in super cities. There's just more opportunity. There's more people. People are there. They're young. They're ambitious, and they have a propensity towards yes. How do we work together? How do we make money together? Whereas when I'm in London, it feels like a very polite, drawn-out maybe all the time. That you just don't get to yes nearly as quickly. There's not as much risk capital. There's not as much. People aren't as aggressive here about trying to build something. So, anyways, long way of saying, Mike, I think you're in the right place at the right time.
But why did you move to London? Out of curiosity.
First off, I just want to acknowledge it makes no sense. Why did we move to London? So,
how many kids? How many kids do you have as well?
I have two kids, 13 and 16. And the reality is, around these big decisions, I'm an influencer, not a decision maker. I'm a big fan of Daniel Kahneman, who just passed away a few weeks ago, a behavioral psychologist that was awarded a Nobel Prize in economics, not his field, but his biggest impact was on economics and decision-making as it relates to economics. And one of the things that I really took from him is I try to outsource every decision that I don't have domain expertise in. I don't make decisions around clothes. I have a uniform. Someone else does my laundry, lays out my clothes for the week. I don't order food. When I'm at a restaurant, I either have the waiter order or I have whoever I'm eating with, including my 13 and 16-year-old sons, I have them order for me. I try to outsource as many decisions as possible such that I can focus on the few decisions that I'm good at and really slow down my reptile brain and try and make really great decisions around the decisions that I have some domain expertise or that are what I call important. Because you only have a certain amount of decision capital, but you get to decide where you allocate that capital. Now, as it relates to big, what I'll call life decisions, I defer to my wife. Before I met my wife, my life was like just a fucking roller coaster, real highs, real lows. And my wife just has a great instincts for what are the big decisions that would make our family happier. She also is quite manipulative and recognizes I have no sense of time and space. So 7 years ago, she said, every 2 years we sit down and we say, nothing's off the table, clean slate, resources, logistics aside, what could each of us potentially do for the other and for ourselves that we think would be a step change in our happiness? And we did this about 7 years ago, and she said, in 5 years, and the key was in 5 years because she recognizes I have no ability to calibrate 5 years. She said, I want to move to Europe. And I said, 5 years, no problem. But unfortunately, women have memories like elephants. And 3 years ago, she went to London and bought a house and got our kids in school. And 2 years ago, we moved to London. And why are we here? We're here because we can be. And that is we wanted to give our kids the opportunity to live overseas. My parents are from the UK. I've always felt a draw here. I've always wanted to live in a foreign country. I'm not getting any younger. My wife is from Europe, so she was comfortable with the idea of moving back. We love Premier League football, but it wasn't a rational decision. I have almost no business here. I make no money here. I'm on planes all the goddamn time again. I mean, this wasn't what I'd call a rational decision. It was a life decision. And people will always say, oh, you left because of Trump or because of America. And I'm like, yeah, I did leave because of America. I left because America has been so good to me. It's given me the prosperity and options to do something like move to Europe for a few years. So if I'm really blunt, I don't like my life as much here as in the U.S. I had to just, my life's on a scale of 1 to 10 is a 9 right now. It was a 9.5 in the U.S. because my business was much easier. I was on planes for 2 hours instead of 8 hours a week. But I know I won't regret it. I don't think I'll look back and I'll think I didn't enjoy living in the UK as much as I enjoyed living in the US, but I won't regret the decision. In sum, we just wanted to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I do think at some point in your life, living in a different country is a really good thing for you to do. Do you find that quite a lot of Americans tend to just stay in America?
Oh yeah, we're very narcissistic. Some crazy low number of Americans even have passports. George Bush had never been to Europe before he was president. I mean, when you think about this, if the news in the United States is 20 minutes U.S. news, 10 minutes international. In Europe, it's flipped. It's 10 minutes about what's happening in the UK and 20 minutes on what's happening internationally. We're very self-absorbed. We're generally, Americans look out the window and they see themselves. And some of that is a good thing. We're very optimistic. We're very risk aggressive. We do believe our way is exceptional. It gives us the confidence to make bold moves. And I think, America for the most part has been sort of the leader globally since the end of World War II. But yeah, we're not what I'd call a broad perspective people. I think it would be really good. A couple things I think a lot about young people. I think it would be fantastic if we had mandatory national service such that young people could serve in the agency of something bigger, their country, and feel more connected to each other, similar to what they do in Israel, mandatory national service. I also think we should have all sorts of programs, more exchange programs to get kids overseas, because what I've noticed is that the more international students we have at NYU where I teach, we're just less likely to declare war on each other, because in 20 or 30 years, those people will be running their respective countries. And it helps to have personal relationships and connected tissue and think back to your days when you were in Moscow or Shanghai or wherever you were an exchange student, and realize these people, we have more in common with these people than we think. And we should be able to work out some or most of these differences. So I'm a big fan of getting kids and people exposed to international culture. And America does a terrible job of that. I mean, think about Canada and Australia. It's like a rite of passage. They get a backpack and they travel around the world. That's not really true in the U.S.
Mm. Have you noticed there's a difference when it comes to the USA and the UK in terms of the vibrations and just the general happiness of youngsters, particularly young men? Did you see it to be fairly even?
Yeah, this is something, so it's a generous question because, I think a lot about this. My sense is it's gotten worse in the UK, but it's plummeted in the United States. In the US, we've just produced the most anxious, depressed generation in history. For the first time in our nation's history, a 30-year-old man or woman isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. That's never happened in the 275-year history of 250 years history of the U.S. And it's through a confluence of factors. The tax structure is slanted against young people. There's sort of this exclusionary culture where we let fewer and fewer people into colleges, fewer and fewer housing permits are issued because the incumbents see advantage to restricting supply to housing and graduate degrees makes their house and their degree become more valuable, but it restricts entry and opportunity for young people. And even the COVID bailouts were nothing but a transfer of wealth from young people who have to pay that $7 trillion in debt back to the incumbents who saw their stocks and their housing values protected. As a matter of fact, home values, the average house value in the U.S. has come from $290,000 in 2019 to today $430,000. And then when you see the escalation in interest rates, in some part because of COVID supply chain and this massive increase in debt, have gone from 3% to 7%, meaning that pre-COVID, 2/3 of America could afford a house. Now it's 1/3. And so young people are just justifiably very discouraged. In addition, you have these algorithms. The frame through which they see everything is controlled by these algorithms that are basically other people vomiting their fake possessions and experiences. So you feel really shitty that you're not making millions of dollars trading Bitcoin, or you're not sitting in front of the pool at Allura Resort in the Gulf or the Almond in Venice. And it just makes you feel like you're failing. And there's a variety of other factors, but we have never had a generation of young people doing as poorly, relatively speaking, as we do now. And it's especially acute among young men who, relative to women, are 4 times more likely to kill themselves, 3 times as likely to be addicted, 12 times as likely to be incarcerated. So just as globally, you've never seen an ascent of a specific group the way we've seen the ascent of women. And this is an amazing thing. There are now more women globally seeking tertiary educational attainment. The number of women elected to parliaments, if you will, globally has doubled since 1995. We have never seen a group fall faster in the U.S. than young men in the last 30 years. There are now more single women who own homes. We're getting close to 2-to-1 female to male college graduates. I mean, young men are just failing, and there's a lack of empathy for them because of the 200-year head start that their fathers and their grandfathers and their ancestors enjoyed by virtue of, being pale and male. There's just a lack of empathy for them. And even the dialogue, when we talk about men's problems or young men struggling, you hear terms like pull themselves up by their bootstraps or accountability. Whereas if any other special interest group was incurring the type of statistics that I just rattled off, there would be massive social intervention and a more productive dialogue around what was required to level up this group. And it's also created tremendous division in the United States because we're having an interesting conversation around DEI, and DEI slowly but surely broadened its scope to provide necessary and needed and justified advantage to non-whites who have struggled in the United States and had wind in their face, to women who for a long time made a lot less than men, to Asians where there's real Asian hate, to gay people who had been persecuted. And basically we've expanded the sphere until basically DEI was meant to advantage everyone but the 26% of America that were white males. And when you have a concerted, programmatic, systemic effort to advantage 74% of America, essentially what that is it's no longer affirmative action, it's discrimination. And that 26% has become very resentful. And because no one's been openly speaking about their problems and having an honest, sober conversation, some really unproductive voices have entered that void. And the manosphere is mostly, it kind of starts off positive, take control of your life, work out, be action-oriented. And then it gets pretty ugly pretty fast. It starts looking at women as property. It starts, talking about the aspiration is to have a supercar and to be mean or politically incorrect or dismissive of special interest groups. And also these young men who kind of come off the tracks and sequester from society and no longer become very social, become very vulnerable to nationalism, conspiracy theory. They're less likely to believe in climate change. They're much more prone to misogynistic content, and some they become shitty citizens. And in the U.S., we're producing a disproportionate amount of the most dangerous person in the world, and that is a young, broken, lonely male. Anyways, that was a word salad. Probably more than you wanted there, Mike.
that was a good answer. I find it interesting because when I was in my early 20s, there was nowhere near as much free information and guidance compared to now. And I think back to if I wanted some advice or I wanted answers to something, there was barely any podcasts out there, and there was fewer people doing YouTube. I would either have to go to a book or actually speak to someone. Yet now, I feel as though it's so easy to educate yourself and almost find the answer to something, yet that isn't helping somehow.
Well, there's some nuance there. It's whenever you transition one resource to another for economic benefit, you're going to have emissions. When you take plant-based calories and you transition it to meat-based calories, you have deforestation and methane. When you transfer or transition fossil fuels to petroleum, you're going to have carbon emissions. We now live in an attention-based economy. And when you convert attention to ads to dollars, you're going to have emissions. So first off, just as fossil fuels and pesticides on the whole are a net positive, we still have an EPA, we still have an FDA. I believe that big tech and some of the things you offered up, access to information, ability to educate yourself. I just watched a bunch of Instagram reels on stretching. I worked out before I jumped on this podcast. My back and my shoulders are hurting, and I realized I haven't been as disciplined about stretching as I should be. So I just type in stretching for an aging athlete, and I got in 3 minutes just really fantastic stretches that I remember doing when I had a trainer. And I mean, right away, just pulled up, 80% of what or 60% of what a physical therapist might take me through. Fantastic access to information, and AI is taking that to a new level. The emissions there and the downside is that when everybody has access to all this information, and creators, if you will, with good or bad intentions, can weaponize that data, target you based on your vulnerabilities, and start sending information suggesting dieting sites when you're a 17-year-old girl who's 5'10", 95 pounds. Start convincing you that the election is rigged such that you don't turn out to vote because one political party has figured out that if they lower turnout, it'll benefit them. Start convincing you that these righteous movements around Me Too and Black Lives Matter, that the situation in the U.S. is actually worse than it actually is. Things have gotten better for women and non-whites progressively for the last 200 years in America. And, you have the misinformation and just downright disinformation that creates rage, a populace that sometimes believes vaccines alter your DNA. And if you start seeing it in your Facebook feed over and over and over, a lie seems less like a lie if it's repeated more. And so there's really, I would say the biggest threat to our society isn't carbon emissions or climate change, or I would say that it's misinformation being pelted at us by what I would call extremists who don't have an interest or believe their view is the one view and don't want a dialogue, don't want a constructive debate, want to manipulate us. And I've talked a lot about the fact that I think the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has basically implanted a neural jack in the wet matter of the majority of our youth in America and is raising a generation of youth, of civic, nonprofit, and business leaders and military leaders that just feel shittier and shittier about America. So what's different, though, about this environment in big tech in the era of kind of information and attention is that there's absolutely no regulation. We decided that Ford should not be able to pour mercury into the river, and we outlawed it. And if we didn't outlaw it, they would continue to do it, because if they didn't do it, they would be at a cost disadvantage to General Motors and Chrysler. There's, in your room that I'm looking at right now, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of regulations that your mic won't explode in your face, that there's a certain low level of asbestos in the drywall behind you. There is zero regulation around the medium where the majority of young people spend the majority of their time. And I think we're paying a huge price for it. I think we're seeing a lot more rage and a lot more depression and a lot more mis and disinformation.
So how does someone protect themselves from what it is that they are seeing on their feeds? I mean, obviously, they can choose to follow and unfollow specific people or pages. They can try and limit their time, but that tends to not work very well. At least when I try to limit my time, they're so good at trying to get you hooked and addicted to it that I think a lot of people are just helpless in that area. I think one thing that I've learned, I mean, particularly over the past few years, whenever I read something, even from a legitimate news website, like whether it's the BBC or Bloomberg or whatever, I always question why they word things a certain way or why they choose to talk about this specific thing. There's always an agenda behind it. And I simply I cannot get all of my information from one source. If there's something which I'm intrigued about, or I think it's that can't be true, I will go off, I'll do my research and try and find the truth behind it from different sources, and then I'll come to my own decisions. But I feel like a lot of people don't do that, and most people these days are getting all of their information from some pretty shady social media outlets.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, and I think your instincts are correct. The first is what I call multiple, quote unquote, credible resources. That just because it's on your Facebook feed does not has almost no correlation to credibility. And the thing is that what the algorithms have figured out, the algorithms will elevate some content over others. So they select certain content that you will see more over other types of content. And one of the means for their selection is the algorithms think what's going to get the most engagement and the most clicks. And novelty, which is a fancy way of saying falsehoods, will circle the globe, as Mark Twain said, before truth has a chance to put on its shoes. Truth is sort of boring. And, it's like Occam's razor. Sometimes the most obvious explanation is the right one. No, it's, the second tower, as RFK Jr. says, came down suspiciously, right? Or that the solar eclipse is there's something nefarious going on. I mean, there's just all sorts that Bill Gates has implanted a microchip in the COVID-19 vaccines. I mean, that shit's interesting, right? It makes for an interesting sci-fi movie. And then if the algorithms go, oh, this creates debate and argument. And every time someone comes on to say, well, no, RNA vaccines don't alter your DNA, it gets a response, then another response, which means another Nissan ad and more shareholder value. So the editors, if you will, controlling the frame through which we perceive the world have a tendency towards misinformation and novelty, and also enragement. We thought in the brand world that sex was the premier vehicle for hooking us and selling. Sex sells. But what we figured out in the last 10 years, or specifically these algorithms have figured out, is that enragement sells. Enragement equals engagement. So if I say, Mike, your views on Dubai are interesting, but these are my thoughts, and this is what I like and didn't like. Or if I say, Mike, you're nothing but a stooge for an oil-based corrupt economy, and you have your head up your ass, that'll get more engagement. That'll get more Nissan ads and more revenue for Meta. So they will take a statement like that and elevate it. And then if someone is trying to divide the citizens of the UAE, they will engage troll farms and porous social media networks that are profit-minded and elevate that type of content. So what I've noticed, I'm older than you. I mean, I'll give you an example. People come up to me all the time on the street and say hi, and that know me or know my content. They could not be more lovely. And sometimes they even come up and say, oh, I disagree with your views on big tech, or I disagree with your views on Israel, whatever it might be. And they want to have a conversation. Or if someone sends me an email and they put their name, their actual name, or LinkedIn. LinkedIn's very good at identity. They're civil.
Yes, civilized.
On my social media platforms, I get called Professor Genocide a dozen times a day. And I click on the identity and it's not a person. Who knows who it is or what it is? So there's a real downside. And the problem is that one comment registers in people's brains as much as a thoughtful comment from a real person. So what you're doing, multiple sources from credible, fact-checked media organizations is really important. Realizing what I try to do, and my flaw, is that I look too much at the like count. If I put out content, I've been very outspoken around Israel, and I get shamed and people get angry and the comments fill with people telling me that I'm wrong. And it influences me. And I don't know how many of those comments are legitimate people who have really want to have a civil dialogue. So what I try and do is just say what I think is right, and try to ignore the likes and the comments. I learn from them, but I try not to be shamed into submission of a certain narrative. Like on Threads is very left-leaning, and I have a kind of a reputation as center-left. So whenever I say something, I don't think student debt forgiveness is a good idea, and wham, the progressives come at me because I haven't signed up for the narrative, and they act like I've betrayed them. And there's no doubt about it. It shapes your view. And what ends up happening is we all end up barking up the same tree, which makes us, one, polarized and stupid. And there's no room for bipartisan cooperation. So I think for the most part, this attention economy and the lack of regulation, lack of age gating, lack of identity verification has been a disaster for our society. I think that the emissions here, I think we are literally choking on the carbon or on the emissions of an attention ad-based economy.
I have a question for you guys. Do you take supplements? And if you do you really know what supplements you should be taking? You see, this is a problem I had for years. I would walk into a supplement store, I would buy loads of random bottles of supplements and just pop pills every day, hoping for the best. But in reality, I had no idea whether or not I should be consuming these supplements. That is where Bionic came into the picture and solved that problem. You see, I've been working with Bionic for the past couple of years, and since 2021, I've been getting my blood work done with them every 3 to 4 months. And based on that blood work, they send it off to get analyzed, and then they put together a very specific customized formula for me, which will last me for 3 to 4 months until I get my next blood work done. And honestly, it's been an absolute game changer for me. They also offer another product called Bionic Go, where all you need to do is go onto the website, fill in questionnaire, and then based on that questionnaire, they can give you your customized supplements. So if that sounds like something that would be of interest, which I highly recommend, go onto the website, bionic.com, and you can use the link in my description to get a nice little discount on your first order. One thing I can't figure out is how there's still so many bots roaming about, even on Instagram. Like, with the amount of money which they have, I think it was published recently that actually they make more money from ads than YouTube does. That's probably because YouTube actually shares a lot of the ad revenue with its creators. But how are there still so many bots leaving comments all over the place? Like, I just don't understand how that can't be fixed.
Well, it's incentives. You just said it. I mean, their ad sales guys are going into Coca-Cola and saying, this is the number of daily active users. So they're going to turn a blind eye to bots and the engagement that bots create, or, because it juices their numbers. It's like they have no incentive, or they do go through and try and clean out stuff every once in a while so it doesn't become too toxic unless you're X. X has just decided to be like 4chan and 8chan. But the incentives are just to have as much, real or fake users as possible, such that their deck for their salespeople is most impressive. It's purely incentives.
Yeah. What is your current purpose, and what is taking up the majority of your time on a day-to-day basis? I know you're churning out these books left, right, and center. What do you feel like your purpose is at the moment, at this point in time?
Well, look, that's a pretty. We're going to need a bigger boat. I just did ketamine therapy, so I've been thinking a lot about my purpose.
Oh, really?
And when I came out of ketamine therapy, is my purpose is to provide more care and love for my kids than was provided for me, and then to expand that circle to my extended family, my friends. That's my purpose in life, is to leave with, if you will, having surplus value, is the way I like to think of it. That's very meta of what I think my purpose is. Professionally, I want to have a large footprint and extended reach around how technology disrupts traditional industry as a means of making a living, and I make a good living, and I want to continue to do it. I enjoy making money. I'm a capitalist. I enjoy making money. I enjoy spending it. I enjoy giving it away. But the thing I'm most focused on now is what I'll call, for lack of a better term, struggling young men. I relate to this group of people. I was one of them. I don't think that they have the advocates they deserve. I think there's a lot of factors that have resulted in, we talk about the homeless crisis in the U.S. 70% of homeless are men. 74% of opioid overdoses are men. Suicide, yeah, we have a homeless, an opioid, and a suicide problem, but for the most part, we have a male homeless, a male opioid overdose, and a male suicide problem. But people never want to frame it that way. And so I relate to these young men. I think it's a huge issue, and it's something where I feel like I have something to say about it. So, meta, I want to have surplus value. But on a tactical level, I want to have reach and influence around struggling young men, and also just nakedly to continue to have make a really good living so I can have great experiences with my family and friends.
I think Japan is particularly having a hard time with the loneliness epidemic. I mean, I've just been there for the past few weeks, and the society is so fascinating.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I've been to America, and I would say a lot of Americans tend to be quite aggressively extroverted. Like, it's a very extroverted place, I find. In Japan, it's the complete opposite. Everybody literally just keeps to themselves. Yeah. And I think it's got to the point there where a lot of the guys just don't interact with girls. In fact, there is a service now where you can actually pay to rent girlfriends for an hour or 2 hours in Japan. And you can actually go to these cafes or salons, whatever they are, where you can have a 30-minute cuddling session with a woman who will cuddle you.
Yeah, it's been that way in Japan for a while, and suicide rates among teens has been high in Japan, or it's over-indexed for a while. And I don't know the specific data on Japan, but the U.S. is either catching up or surpassed Japan, and a lot of it is loneliness. I was on a call with the Department of Homeland Security, and they asked me to give them some advice around the threats posed by AI, and they wanted to talk about self-healing weapons and misinformation and the likelihood of it becoming sentient. And I said, I think you're missing the biggest threat of AI, and that is loneliness. And I think what you see in America, and I can't speak to it as much about what's happening in Japan, but in America, you have a group of young men who are not cut out for college. Their prefrontal cortex doesn't mature as fast. They're in more single-parent homes, and there's just no getting around it. When a boy loses an adult male role model, the likelihood he goes to college, the likelihood that he finds a mate plummets, and his likelihood of suicide, obesity, depression skyrockets. And so you have young men are just, what we found with most studies is that while girls are physically weaker, emotionally and mentally, they're stronger than boys. And so you have more single-parent households. You have a lack of middle-class jobs, our manufacturing base, and you also have the brightest, most well-resourced people in the world trying to convince young men that they can have a reasonable facsimile of life on a screen with algorithms. They don't need real friends. They can go on Discourse or Reddit and find friends. They don't need a real job. They can trade Dogecoin or day trade on Coinbase or Robinhood. They don't need to go through the humiliation, the effort, the expense, the rejection, the resilience of finding a girlfriend, who, by the way, have become increasingly selective, which in some ways is a good thing, other ways are bad. They feel shunned in online dating, where there's 2.5 of them for every one woman, and 20% of the women all want the same, 80% of the women all want the same kind of 5% of guys. So they feel a lack of economic opportunity. They're sequestered from society by these screens and algorithms. They become lonely. They go down this rabbit hole, and they basically never develop the skills to engage in society. There are 3 million able-bodied men in the U.S. who aren't even seeking employment. Half of Gen Z men say they are no longer actively even trying to date. They're not even trying. And so the question is, well, why is that happening for women? Women, first off, are dating older. 1 in 3 men under the age of 30 has a girlfriend. 2 in 3 women under the age of 30 have a boyfriend because they're dating older. They want more economically and emotionally viable men, and that usually means older men. In addition, when young women are lonely, they have much better social networks. They have much stronger friend networks and the consequent guardrails and support and love, whereas guys become kind of lone wolves and kind of literally sequester from everyone and everything. And probably the most support I would get for the work we're doing is from mothers. And they essentially say kind of the same narrative. I have 3 kids, 2 girls, 1 boy. 1 girl's in Chicago and PR, the other's in Wharton, and my son is in the basement playing video games and vaping. And I just don't know what to do. And it's usually a single mom, middle income or lower income, and they're just besides themselves. They just see the girls just pulling away from the boys. And there's some really positive things here. Chris Williams calls it the high heels effect. Every year, women have gotten taller. They're less dependent upon a man. They're professionally excelling. They're just killing it, and good for them. But the thing is about mating is women date socioeconomically horizontally and up, men horizontally and down. And so when that pool of horizontal and up shrinks every year because men aren't doing well, and the line gets higher and higher for women, who quite frankly the media tell, you don't need that man. You love yourself more. Walk right out that door, right? There's no media or aspirational songs telling a man to walk right out that door. That's not it. And when asked if women would be satisfied with a man who's 80% of everything they want, 2/3 say no, I deserve it all. You pose the same question to a man, and 2/3 say yes, that would be great. So media and online dating to a certain extent have massively raised the expectations of women, and you can't tell people to lower their expectations. And there are fewer and fewer men who meet those expectations. We've all seen those TikToks of women who are asked, what are your minimum requirements for a man? And it usually comes down to two key criteria, height and money. He has to be at least 6 feet tall, has to make at least $100,000. That doesn't sound that unreasonable. But if you take out married men and you go 21 to 50, that's 0.6% of the population. And because now people are meeting online, where those metrics become more important than everything, people aren't connecting. Because, for example, with remote work, 1 in 3 relationships begin at work. And HR doesn't like to talk about this, but 1 in 3 relationships begin at work, and 99% of them are consensual. Why is that? Well, if you talk to couples that have been together longer than 20 years, 3/4 of them will say that initially one was much less interested than the other. And it was usually the woman who was less interested. Women have a much finer filter. But they saw that he was kind. They saw that he was good at what he does. They liked the way he smelled. They liked the way his body language. They found out that he was funny. They found out that he was kind. None of these attributes can be demonstrated easily online. And so what we have is a series of very base criteria that are eliminating the majority of the pool of men for consideration from women. Women end up dating older, oftentimes also end up lonely. Men, young men, have very few prospects and become lonely. The difference is they become dangerous to society and to themselves. And what I think we're going to see is the emergence of AI girlfriends, where guys start entering into, it's the movie Her, but guys enter a relationship where they get emotional, physical, and sexual gratification from increasingly sophisticated girlfriend bots that are low cost, low entry, low risk, and they just become totally sequestered from society. And then I worry that these bots could be weaponized by bad actors and that these men could be radicalized, which was what I was talking to the Department of Homeland Security about. But I think that the biggest concern from AI is that it'll speedball loneliness by giving, men even more excuses not to engage in the really difficult work of relationships. There's a reason that romantic comedies are 2 hours, not 15 minutes, because this shit is hard. And if you think about the best relationships in your life, they usually were difficult. They usually involve some sort of risk-taking or perseverance or cost or what have you. And I think men have been trained by these very sophisticated companies and algorithms that they can just stay at home and have some reasonable semblance of that.
Do you think, for example, that guy in his 20s who doesn't have any motivation or ambition, who sat playing video games all day, doesn't take care of himself, would it be his responsibility to pull himself out of that rut, or the parent or parents?
Well, the answer is yes. I think that it's parents. I think it's the individual, and I think it's also society. I think we want to create an atmosphere where more younger people can be successful. There, as a percentage of GDP, the percentage of wealth controlled by people under the age of 40 has gone from 13% to 7%. The wealth of young people has been cut in half in the face of unprecedented prosperity. Why? Because in the U.S., we have these tax breaks for old people. We have mortgage interest deduction. Who owns homes? Old people. Who rents? Young people. We have capital gains tax deduction. Who owns stocks and makes their money off of investments? People my age. Who makes their money working? People your age. So there's been this giant transfer of wealth from young to old people. This is especially hard on men who are disproportionately evaluated from a romantic partner standpoint based on their economic viability. So you have young people who are no longer as economically viable. As a result, aren't hooking up, aren't having kids, not attracted to each other. In 1990, 60% of people 30 to 34 had at least one kid. Now it's 27%. And the question is, do people just not want kids, or have they decided I can't afford them? I can't afford a house. I can barely pay off my student loans, and you want me to have a kid? So a lot of this has been purposeful decisions. I'm actually giving a TED Talk on this next week in Vancouver. I think there's effectively been a proxy war on the young, where we have decided to transfer wealth from young people to old people and then expect them to be okay with it. And then it gets speedballed by algorithms that convince them that everyone else around them is making a shit ton of money and dating a hot guy or girl. And it just makes them feel terrible about themselves. So, yeah, I coach a lot of young men. I'm like, okay, give me your phone. I'm not going to judge you. Let's look at where you're spending time. And we're going to take 8 hours out of your phone and we're going to reallocate it to 3 places. 1, fitness. You got to get strong. Lean into your strengths. Young men have amazing physiology. Their bone structure, their muscle mass, poured over with testosterone, is just an amazing thing. Lean into it. Work out 3 to 4 times a week. Get really fit. You'll feel better about yourself. You'll be kinder. You'll be more attractive to mates. And also part of that working out is take more pride in your physical grooming. Get your girlfriend, your mother, a gay friend, I realize how bad that sounds, to help you with your apparel and personal grooming. There's something about the heterosexual male brain that just does not get that shit. So outsource that. Get help. Get physically strong and look the best you can. 2, start making money. I don't care what it is. A dasher, an Uber driver, just start making a little bit of money. Get a taste for the flesh of money. Because the way to make a lot of money is to start making a little. And then 3, start spending time in the agency of something bigger than yourself with strangers, nonprofit work, church, sports league, political canvassing, whatever it is. You have to, book club, you have to be around strangers in the agency of something bigger where you can meet people and develop those skills. We are mammals. We are meant to be around each other. And then all of this needs to be wrapped into a plan. Women are attracted to men for 3 reasons. In reverse order: kindness. 2 is intellect, and the easiest way, fastest way to express intellect is actually humor. And then first and foremost, not just resources, but their ability to signal that at some point they'll have resources. So you don't have to be rich, but you have to have a plan. I'm driving an Uber. I just leased another car, and I'm hiring a driver to hire. I'm going to school to get my vocational certification in installation of energy efficient HVAC heaters, whatever it might be. You have to have a plan. And then I have a series of other things around doing an audit around substances. I love alcohol, I love THC, but I try and modulate it because I find too much of it gets in the way of my life. But, I do think it's a full community project. I think the individual, I think society, third places, better tax opportunities, more money for young people, and also parental involvement. What I find in general is that the only place the parents are really failing is you just got to keep in mind the single point of failure for young men is when they lose an adult male role model. And 1 out of 3 men no longer have contact with their children 6 years after divorce. And so, when you have a kid, you're just signing up to stay involved in that kid's life no matter what, is the way I've said, I think a lot about masculinity. I'm writing a book on it, but I think that the ultimate expression of masculinity is to take an interest or develop an irrational passion for the well-being of a child that isn't yours, specifically, ideally, a boy who really needs a male role model. And unfortunately in America, because of the Catholic Church and Michael Jackson, men are remiss or reticent to get involved in the lives of other boys. And it's total bullshit. We need men to get involved in the lives of boys that aren't theirs. That's really where men are lacking right now. So we're not taking care of enough boys that we aren't biologically related to.
I'm curious to know, I know your father wasn't really in the picture when you were growing up. I think you mentioned you were raised predominantly by your mother. I'd like to know how that would have been different from me, for example, I lost my mother when I was around 11. So I was brought up in a very masculine household. It was my brother and it was my dad. And I'm so thankful that he was an amazing role model. But the lack of that mother figure definitely led me to have some problems with expressing my emotions, the success rate of relationships. I could talk to a girl, but I didn't understand how to communicate my feelings or sometimes express emotion. I'm wondering how you dealt with that. And I've noticed from my experience as well, I've got some female friends here who have become pregnant, yet the father doesn't want anything to do with it. So they've just been like, you know what, well, fuck him. I'm just going to raise this child by myself. And then some of them have had a boy, and I can just see they're doing an amazing job, but I wonder how he will grow up without having that father figure in his life, unless the mother is, maybe getting him to go and socialize with other guys and do maybe some like jujitsu or boxing or something which can help with that situation.
So first off, the fact that you're even self-aware enough to recognize that you have some deficiencies because of the loss of your mother and zero in on those deficiencies that you might need to compensate for, or even recognizing them, means you are well ahead of where most men, or certainly where I was at your age. I just didn't think that way. I wasn't self-aware enough. So, the reason why the first thing they do in AA meetings is they introduce themselves and say, I'm an alcoholic, is the first thing is to acknowledge the issue. So the fact you even recognize it puts you ahead of the game. You are in an unusual situation because 92% of single-parent homes are headed by a single mother. You were one of the 8% that was headed by a single father. And going back to the original stat, you immediately, like me, became part of a vulnerable group because it ends up that girls have almost the same outcomes in a dual or single-parent household, which is really interesting. I mean, it's not to say that their father isn't important, but you don't see a tangible drop-off in college attendance or an increase in depression rates among girls raised in single-parent homes. With boys, the moment there's just one parent, and usually it's the lack of a male role model that really takes a toll, you see a lot of issues. So, the question is, did you have other sources of kind of like feminine care in your life? Did you have an aunt? Did you have a girlfriend early? Did you get some of that care and some of that all-important sort of maternal love, if you will, that your mother would have provided or not? And what I'm grateful for is I always had really nice men in my life. My mom had some serious long-term boyfriends who stayed involved in my life after my mom and them broke up. I had a stockbroker take an interest in my life. I walked into a stock brokerage with $200, and I used to call this guy every day to talk about my stock, and he'd give me a mini 15-minute lesson in the markets, and he was a nice man and smart, and I started learning about the markets. I just had nice men I had this guy across the hall take me horseback riding. He figured out that I was being raised by a single mother, and him and his girlfriend every other Sunday used to take me out to Westlake. They'd drive me out an hour and they'd take me horseback riding, when I was like 11. So, that was just an enormous, that hole got plugged for me. And what you have in America now is you have an entire generation of boys who in some communities where a lot of the men are incarcerated, where in school, K through 12, somewhere between 70 and 90% of the teachers in any given school are women. You have boys growing up who hit 21 and they have almost no men around them, almost none. And as a parent of two boys, what I see is, oh my gosh, they need their mom. They also really need me. And there's just certain things that each of us can do that the other can't. Each of us play a role that no matter how much I tried to model being a mother, I would not be able to do it. And there's certain things she cannot do. And so, I think that I'd like to think, and there was something called Big Brothers in the United States, that every man's responsibility is to do an assessment of their local neighborhood and especially their friends and see who are the kids being raised by single parents and make it just part of the zeitgeist in our society, where that means that the men and occasionally some of the women in the situation where you're in get involved in that kid's life. Because what we found is that two parents are just so much better than one. And also the gender matters, which isn't to say that non-binary doesn't deserve the exact same amount of rights and privileges as all of us, but 90 to 95% of us decide to be binary. And those attributes that are more prone or more likely to be found in people born as women and men are really important in terms of rearing a child. But, you started the question with my dad not being involved in my life. I've kind of let my dad off the hook a little bit. My dad is 94. What I realized is that he was a better father to me than his father was to him. He was abused. He was raised in poverty. He just had a shitty life, and he tried with me. He wasn't around a lot when I was growing up, and I think I kind of had trouble forgiving him for that till I got a little bit older. But yeah, there's the full village project of immediately identifying kids who don't have two parents. And I wonder if you could even do it with technology and just identify, all right, here's an opportunity. But it's very strange in the U.S. There's a weirdness around men getting involved in boys' lives, that somehow they're seen as there's something untoward there or weird. And it's really unhealthy, and I hope we change it.
Yeah. You've managed to successfully find a partner that's obviously, given you almost the perfect life. What advice would you give to single guys, younger guys, and even myself included, who's still learning every day? What is the perfect partner for a specific individual? How do you find that?
It doesn't exist. You'll find the partner when you're sort of ready. Finding the partner is more about you than the partner. I mean, obviously you want to find someone great, but you're a successful young man making good money who's handsome. You're going to have, your problem isn't going to be who to partner with. It's going to be who not to partner with. So it's more about when you're ready. And then the key to a good partnership, I find, is obviously you got to pick the right person. But beyond that, it's the generosity and forgiveness you bring to the relationship. I was divorced. It wasn't my partner's fault. It was my fault. I saw relationships as a transaction. If I wasn't getting as much from a friendship, a professional relationship, a romantic relationship, I was upset and angry. And what I realized is that you got to put the scorecard away and say, all right, what kind of boyfriend, what kind of husband, what kind of father, what kind of friend, what kind of business partner do I want to be? And then just live up to that and hope that you're on the positive side, that you add surplus value, because keep in mind, it's natural instinct to inflate your contribution and minimize theirs. So if you are constantly keeping score, you're going to find that you're unhappy and upset all the time and dissatisfied with your relationships. And we didn't talk about my book, but what I found in the research is the difference between being financially secure and super wealthy is a function of character. And that is people who bring a great deal of forgiveness and generosity and love to their professional and personal relationships, such that they aggregate a number of really loyal allies. And the best way to build wealth, the best way to build happiness is, again, in the agency of others. And that's romantic and professional partnerships where you forgive each other, you're generous, and you really work on each other's happiness, and you commit to adding surplus value, not keeping score.
Would you say, I think I've heard you talk about this before. I mean, obviously there's the downsides of being a man in a position where you have almost no opportunity, or like it's so difficult for you to find a partner or even to date. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, there comes disadvantages of having too much choice. Like if you are that man who is in the top 5%, obviously it's a great position. It's a much better position to be in, but what are some of the negatives that someone like that would face?
Well, first off, that's the mother of all good problems, right?
Yeah.
But look, the bigger, better deal theory, if you're living in New York and you're attractive and have money and you're living in Dubai, you can have a lot of experience and a lot of fun. I would say enjoy it, and don't be afraid to spend extended periods of time with one person and see what develops. I don't think you have to, I'm not telling you to get married right away and you can't be happy being single. Enjoy it, take advantage of it. It's a lot of fun, have the fun, but also don't be afraid to go deep with one person and see if you can find something more meaningful. But again, let me finish with where I started. That's a really good problem.
Yeah.
It's very good to be Mike in Dubai. Mike, I've got to
Yeah,
sign off. I have Pivot right now.
A lot of people would look at me now and they think it's always been like that, but it certainly wasn't. Like in my teenage years, I was very confused and angry and didn't really know what was going on. Like, luckily, I was surrounded by a lot of good guys because I was very sporty, so I played a lot of rugby. So I had a great friendship group. University was a hell of a lot of fun. Probably wasn't for me, but the whole university experience was amazing. I went to Newcastle University, studied economics and business management, and then I was probably a little bit lost for a couple of years, had a load of different jobs. Then I realized the only thing I cared about was the gym. So then I became a personal trainer and then opened up a gym in Newcastle. But I would say for the majority of my 20s, up until probably the age of 28, I had no money. Like, I was really struggling for money. But I did take a lot of care of my physical appearance. So I looked the part and I could get dates. But then I realized that if I want to have a chance with a lot of the women who I actually want to be with, I'm going to need to, there's no other way around it. I need to make more money. Unless I go and move somewhere where a majority of the women don't really care about how much money you have. But in the West, that seems to be, as you said before, like a priority of theirs, where you have to be earning at least 100 grand a year. So I went on a mission, just kind of locked myself away for a couple of years and just focused on growing my social media, and then got to the point where I actually had money to spend. And then that's when, in my late 20s, I actually really started to enjoy my life, particularly early 30s. So I definitely feel like I want to enjoy it for a little bit longer, but I do want to start a family and have kids at some point.
The last 2 or 3 minutes of what you just said should be a manifesto for young men. And if I could give them any advice, it would be to listen to what you just said the last 180 seconds. First off, moving to another country, it's not that they don't value money. It's just the bar is lower. You can just, if you make $40,000 a year living in Thailand, you're going to be very attractive to mates. The reality is women want economic security and they want someone who's going to protect their children. Economic security is unfairly important for men in a Western society. Your physical fitness and your appearance are hugely important, not only for other people, but for yourself. You see results. And the reason why women are attracted to guys who are physically fit is, in addition to just primal desire, they look at a guy and it says, when they look at you, they say, this guy has discipline. This guy can commit to something. This guy is good. This guy can make a plan. This guy can get out of the house. These are all the attributes to be successful economically and in a relationship. So it's more about having big biceps. It's about the character you bring to having big biceps. And the fact that you recognized early you had to get focused on economic security, okay, I'm not saying that's fair, but that's the reality of the West. And you put your head down and you said, I've got to get economic security. In addition, you were on your way to being a trainer who had affairs with married women. That's where you were going to end up. Instead, you're now a guy who's got a career, who's got a plan, also happens to be fit, and you're going to have a really broad selection set of mates, which is key to finding a great partner and building real wealth. So what you just said is sort of a manifesto, I think, for what young men should aspire to. Speaking of aspiring, I have to leave and go to my Pivot podcast, but I have very much enjoyed this conversation.
No problem. It's been very good. I mean, I had a whole load of questions left to ask you, but it's been amazing. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mike. Congrats on all your success.
Thank you. And I'll be in London at some point. Probably it's not very often, but I'll hit you up if you're about.
Yeah, I'd like that. We'll grab a beer.
Sweet. Thank you very much.
Take care.